Before I go any further with this, I know I have done some pretty stupid things over the years, and I never really believed in the paranormal until this incident happened. So about when me and my best friend were in high school, year 11 to be exact, I was staying over at her place for the weekend after I had finished my work shift. It was around this time my best friend had an art project that was due soonish, and she didn't have any inspiration to help her create something original. Then she came up with the idea to do a freaky photo shoot to see if that would help inspire her to create something, and I ended up being her muse, you could say. And mind you, she is very much into special effects and stuff, as she is a makeup artist in the making. So, by the time she was finished with the makeup, you could say I looked like a decaying and walking corpse. We decided to take some photos out in her backyard, and then go analyze the pictures. Some got her attention, and some didn't. So then I cleaned myself up, and then we tried again. But this time, an elf-like character. That's when I got the brilliant, not so brilliant idea that maybe we should get to the nearby lake since there was some awesome places there that would be perfect. Mind you, it was already 11:30 p.m. at night. The first mistake we made was actually going through with that idea at 11:30 p.m. at night, which, well, it was pretty stupid to begin with since all the bad things happening around our local area, missing people, animals, murders, etc. That alone should have been a clear indication that we shouldn't be going. That wasn't a thought to us in the slightest. So, when my best friend drives us there and parks in the big empty car park, which was another clear indicator that we really shouldn't be there, we just sat in her car for a good few minutes just discussing how the photos should be taken. Then that's when I got a chill down my spine and the sensation that we were being watched from somewhere. That feeling never left, and to this day I can't believe my stupid self had just blatantly ignored that altogether. I wasn't the only one. My best friend also got the exact same feeling I did, and then we proceeded to get out of her car and start taking photos like we discussed. She has fake realistic swords and other weapons, so we were using those as props, and everything was going perfectly fine, besides feeling like we were being watched. What happened next still makes my heart stop, because the place we were at had hiking and biking trails, as well as being surrounded by a woodland area, and not to mention a lake just off to our left a good few meters away. What we heard whilst in the middle of taking some more photos was the sound between a strangled and drying animal mix with a high-pitched human scream, and when I tell it sounded way too close comfort, I mean it sounded too close for comfort. That sound lasted for a good solid minute, just one singular sound with no breath in between it. Then it stopped and went eerily quiet. Way too quiet. Now looking back on it, there was no sound of insects making any noise when we got out of the car, and there was very certainly none after that sound, which only means that there was a predator or something of the sorts nearby. I thought I was just hearing things, or thought it possibly was just a native animal of sorts. At this point, me and best friend were starting to freak out a little bit, because then we heard the sound of sticks on ground snapping in half to the right of us near one of the hiking trails, which wasn't too far from where we were not that long ago. We tried to not panic and finish the last of the photos. That was dumb, idiotic idea, I know, but at this point, we have made a few so far. I think I was zoning out and focusing on what she wanted me to. For example, like hold the sword in a swinging position like you were about to slay down a beast. I sensed that my best friend had stopped giving instructions and looked to her to see that she was standing and looking terrified, to say the least. This was our conversation in that moment. Me. You good? My best friend. Slowly come over to me. But whatever you do, don't. Look. Behind you. When she said those words, I instinctively and very stupidly looked behind me, to see that standing about a good 10 meters or so from me was a tall, stocky but lean black figure that wasn't quite human nor animal from the looks of it. But at first, I thought it was a kangaroo. Yes, I forgot to mention we live in Australia, with the way it was carrying itself. A very big kangaroo in this instance. I then wished that I hadn't looked, and now looked back at my best friend, and now realized we needed to leave immediately. Because whatever the hell that thing behind me was, definitely wasn't friendly at all. But we couldn't just bolt off back to the car, as that would definitely cause the thing to chase us down, and it definitely would catch up with no trouble at all. So we had to, as calmly as possible, pick up our belongings and slowly go back to the car. But since I didn't know what hell we were dealing with, I didn't want to keep my back it, as that would have very stupid, and I wanted to make sure it was still there. Thankfully it was. But as soon as we got to her car and quickly got in, making sure the doors were locked, I looked out the windshield and saw that it was no longer there. We quickly hightailed it out of there, and once back on the road, I then looked in the side mirror on my side of her car and saw the figure standing motionless in the middle of road watching us leave. That's when me and my best friend finally could process what just happened. Then just before we got to the main road again, there was an actual kangaroo standing in the middle of the road, which freaked us out more, but we didn't have a car accident from it. And then the car horn was beeped, the kangaroo went on its way, and so did we. Once back at her place, we quickly got inside and locked the doors, shut any open windows, and locked them, as well as closed the curtains. The rest of the night and early morning, we could hear scratching and tapping on the windows, which we ignored and decided to go to bed. Needlessly to say, always trust your gut feeling, or you may not live long enough to tell the tale. You just finished showering. You feel refreshed and clean. You lifted up both of your legs to get out of the bath one by one. You then smile when you realize that you are on a road trip and away from school. You feel even more happy when you realize that your partner is taking the trip with you. You look in the mirror. You dry yourself and get your clothes to get dressed. Your straight dark brown hair is wet, so you dry it with one of the hair dryers you brought with you from home, back from London. You then look into the reflection of the mirror, and your eyes immediately catch what's behind you. Next to the bathroom door, there stood a tall man wearing a faceless mask. Your heart skips a beat, and then you realize that his clothes were dark and wet. You then think to yourself that maybe this was all just a bad dream. But you know it's not. You then remember your boyfriend, Adam, is in the living room, watching the TV. How come he isn't here to save me? Who was this guy and how did he get into our cabin? Did this man kill Adam? No, you can't think like that. You just can't. This person is now at your full view, right in front of you. You want to cry, but you hold it in hopes this man won't attack for that. He moves his head, as if he was some type of animal. You immediately run for life as you sped past him. You head towards your room and lock the door behind you. You cover your mouth as quietly as possible to cover your sobbing. You got your backpack and grabbed a jacket that Adam had gotten for you on your birthday a year ago. Then you quickly head to the window next to your bed, but to your horror, the man in the faceless mask appears out of nowhere from the other side of the glass. He placed both of his gloved, covered hands on the glass. You jumped in fear and backed away from the mattress. You ran out from the room and headed to the living room in search of your keys, but you then remember that Adam had them last. You get so pissed off for that. You called out for your boyfriend, but there was no answer. He is nowhere around. All of a sudden, you see your cell phone on the ground. You picked it up in hopes to answer you. Your heart starts to pound hard as you hear the other line ringing. But then the only sound that exists in that moment was static. You then hear a raspy voice on the other line. Sally, you're next. You immediately throw the phone to the ground, and you wonder to yourself what the hell is going on. You search through one of the drawers in the kitchen. You find a small gun and a lighter. You know you need to find a way out of this mess. You can feel the fear under your skin. You slowly make your way to the front door. You want to put your hand on the doorknob, but a knock sounds straight towards you. Knock, knock, knock. You hear the knocking, but a voice comes through. Behind the door. Hey babe, I left my phone inside the room. Could you open the door? You calm down and quickly start to realize that maybe this was all just your mind playing with you. Adam is here. Nothing bad is going to happen. You then start to wipe the tears off your face. You take off the latch from the door, and to your surprise, standing in front of you, the same man you saw before, the one with the faceless mask, was in your full view. He was such a tall man. He grabbed you by your hair. You can feel that he is pulling your hair way too hard as he is dragging you out of the cabin. You can feel the fear coming back to you. It's coming back to haunt you. This person, this monster, whoever or whatever he was, did not speak to you. He could look at you, and you would already be terrified. You get scared that you are not even praying for your rescue to come and save you. You just want all of it to go away. You remember when you were 13, You had received a dog for Christmas, and you were so happy. Or you remember when you received awards for being the best student in school. You then start to have flashbacks on how you met Adam. But somewhere through your life, something felt off. Something didn't seem right. You then remember that you have seen this man before. The man that is dragging you by your hair. You have seen his face before. He would sometimes hide from a distance as he would watch you and what you had gone through within your life. You remember how you would sometimes hear tapping from your window as a little girl, but you could never find what was there. And now, your childhood monster is coming back for you. You then snap back to reality. The man had dropped you in the dirt. You look up and see his hideous, deformed face when he takes off his mask. You then remember that you had a gun and use your first shot on the man's leg. He screams as he falls, screaming in pain. You then got up from the ground and ran away from him. Your mind then starts to wonder, where the hell is Adam? Did he just leave you in this mess? You tell yourself, don't look back, don't look back. You keep on running towards the woods. You pass by tall trees, and in the end, you are running towards the darkness. You just kept on going that you had gotten lost and couldn't find your way to the rescue station. You now don't know what to do. The sound of nature at night had taken its place. The only piece of light that existed with you was coming from the moon. You are cold and alone and scared. You continue to keep on walking in the shadows. You try to process what had just happened. You then start to cry. The sound of leaves breaking is heard from behind you. I'm not alone. You thought to yourself. You don't want to look at what is behind you. You want to? No. You need to. But you still won't. You then start to smell something familiar. Adam's cologne. Tears start to fall from your eyes even harder. You prepare yourself and pull out the gun from your pocket. A hand is placed on your shoulder from behind. You slowly look at what is behind you. This man who had followed you for years is now wearing your boyfriend's face as his own. His expression showed how he was terrified in his last moments. You scream in horror. The man then grabs you by the neck and lifts you up in the air. It's quiet. You only hear the sound of your heart beating. You know something is going to happen. And then something sharp goes through your chest. The horrible sound of your blood running out of you. And then you finally figure out what is happening. I first started noticing that something was wrong around 3 months ago. At the time, I was working from home and would usually light a scented candle while I worked, which usually helped me relax and stay focused on my work. I would usually burn through a candle a week, but over time, the candles started to take less time to fully burn up. At first, I thought that this was because of a change in ingredients the company that made the candles used. But the problem persisted after I switched candle brands, which I once again blamed on the candle manufacturers. I kept this belief for another week until the first incident. While getting up from my computer desk, which faces away from the candle, to take a quick bathroom break, I caught a glimpse of the lit candle. A 2-inch layer of molten wax rested on another 3-inch layer of solid wax, the wicks rising out at first and being somewhat visible through the molten layer, finally breaking the surface and being slowly burned away. The flames flickered as I swung the door open and walked out of the room. When I returned 10 minutes later, the molten layer was gone, and the wicks had been shortened so that the flames rested right above the solid layer of the wax. At first, I thought that the glass jar that contained the candle was leaking, but after a short inspection, I was only able to find 2 small drops of candle wax that had solidified right next to the candle on the bedside table. I still had 2 hours of work left to do, but I was too lost in thought and was unable to do any work for the rest of the day. Every night before I go to sleep, I like to read for at least 30 minutes, and while reading, I usually light a candle. Around 4 days later, I had mostly forgotten about the incident and went back to using candles. Due to my naivety, it returned. I fell asleep while reading with a candle lit on my bedside table. I woke up to loud slurping noises. As I opened my eyes, the brightness of the light I had not turned off almost blinded me. As my eyes tried to readjust to the light and focus on what was in front of me, I saw a somewhat humanoid, dark gray to light blue blur that contrasted with the white paint on the walls behind it. Another gray line stretched from the shape's head to the candle on my bedside table. I could feel my heart skip 5 consecutive beats. I opened my mouth and tried to force out a scream for help, but the pressure I applied to my throat was way beyond what it was able to handle, leading me to only produce a light wheezing sound. I tried to sit up, or to at least prop myself up, but my muscles failed me. Trying to push myself up with my arms felt impossible. As I stared at the figure that had suddenly appeared in my room, my eyes finally managed to focus, making it possible for me to see the intruder who was now staring at me. The figure was a man at least 7 feet tall, without clothes. He looked bloated. His eyes were bloodshot and looked like they would pop out of their sockets. At any point, his skin was a grayish light blue. His lips extended from his mouth like an elephant's trunk, which had been split in half. The lips extended from the man's face to the candle. The flames had been put out. He was using his lips as a makeshift straw, slowly sucking up all the molten wax from the candle, which had fully liquefied while I was asleep. I laid in bed, unable to move, unable to scream for help, staring until he emptied the jar. His lips retracted back to his face, the molten wax solidifying on their tips and cracking. Flakes of wax falling off the man's lips and falling to the floor. The man grinned, staring at me. The ridges and gaps between the teeth were filled in with wax, making it impossible to make out where one tooth ended and the next one began. The man opened the door he was standing next to, but instead of walking out of the room, he stepped behind it. His face peered at me from above the door, and then once again, like he had done to drink the wax, the man puckered his lips, which stretched from his mouth and floated to me. I shook and tried to roll over away from him. I wanted to get up and run, but my fear had taken over my body. Tears flowed from my eyes. He kissed me on the cheek, leaving flakes of wax and light moisture. He retracted his lips and lowered his head behind the door. I don't remember falling asleep, but when I woke up, I saw the empty glass jar, which at one point contained the candle. Even though I had hoped that what had happened was a dream, it wasn't. I still had flakes of wax on my cheek, and on my bedroom floor, the wax in the jar had disappeared. I called the police, but they were unable to find anyone in my apartment. They also could not find any evidence of a break-in. After the break-in, I started looking for a new apartment to move to, thinking that the man was tied to the building I was in. But even though I had thrown out all of my candles, I could not stomach spending another hour in my apartment, constantly looking over my shoulder or walking around with my back pressed up against the wall to not allow it to creep up on me. Thankfully, my friend Emma was able to let me stay over at her apartment while I looked for a new one for myself. Me and Emma have been friends since we were 8, and we've been there to support each other when times get rough. This isn't the first time I've had to stay over at her house for an extended amount of time. In fact, I have had to stay over at Emma's as many times as she has had to stay over at my apartment. Whether it was because of evictions after losing a job, breakups, or a candlewax drinking squatter. I didn't even know if it was human. I mean, sure, it looked like one. But human lips are not supposed to do what his did. And somehow it didn't have a reaction to molten wax being poured down its esophagus. I didn't tell Emma about what happened, the details at least. I just told her that a man had broken into my house and was watching me sleep. The only people I told the truth to be my therapist and the cops, and all of them disregarded what I told them as my mind making things up after a traumatic event. For a while, I believed what they said. I mean, why wouldn't I? But then I started seeing him again. For a few days, I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me again like it had done during the night of the incident. For split seconds out of the corner of my eye, I would see the outline of a tall, bloated figure. At first, they were hours apart, but after a while, it became constant. He was standing in each room I passed, in every single dark corner I glanced past, and then he spoke. "Feed me." It stood in the kitchen, peering over from a small gap between the fridge and the sink, where the trash can that had been knocked over onto its side usually stood. His voice was raspy, and every word that came out of his mouth was distorted, as if he were gargling water. But still, I could somehow clearly make out each word he said from over 15 feet away. "Please, just leave me alone, Why are you following me?" I shouted at the figure. The same fear that had taken over my body during the night I saw him for the first time paralyzing me, making it impossible for me to move anything other than my eyes, eyelids, and mouth. "I'm starving. I need you to feed me," it replied again. Now, stepping out from behind the fridge, he stepped directly onto a rotten banana, its mushy brown contents seeping out of the peel under the pressure of his decomposing foot, which was covered in scabs, and took up the same grayish light blue color as the rest of his body. He mostly looked the same. His bloodshot eyes bulged from their sockets, but now his tongue was swollen. It peeked out from between his bloated, cracked gray lips. It stared at me, waiting for an answer. "Okay, I'll feed you, but please just leave me alone," I replied, the tone of my voice shifting into high-pitched squeals with every quick breath I took. He looked satisfied by my response. He somehow squeezed his bloated body back into the gap that was at least 4 times smaller than him. After peering over at me from above the fridge, he bent over backwards, his spine releasing a series of sickening cracks until he was fully obscured by the fridge, and then he vanished. Still barely in control of my body, I limped over to the couch tucked away in the back corner of the living room. It took me at least 10 minutes to steady my breathing and 20 more to fully regain control of my body again. But as soon as I did, I ran out the house and to the nearest store. During the 15-minute walk, he stared at me through dark windows and the backs of cars, peered out at me from gaps between leaves in the trees and bushes. He even followed me into the store, staring at me from the middle of deserted aisles, before disappearing right before my eyes were able to fully catch him. Once I finally got the candles, I randomly picked 4 off of the shelves and rushed to the self-checkout. When I arrived home, I had 2 hours before Emma got off work. I didn't want to feed it while she was home, and I didn't want her to see it. I pulled out 2 of the candles from the black plastic bag and placed them on the kitchen table. The first, a light blue candle, named Garden Rain, and the second, a red candle named Juicy Watermelon. I pulled out a lighter from one of the drawers Emma used after her stove stopped lighting on its own and lit each of the 6 wicks on the candles. As soon as I started seeing the wax melt under the heat of the burning wicks, I dropped the lighter onto the table next to the candles and ran out of the room. I could not stomach seeing that thing again. Even just thinking about it made me shudder and hyperventilate. The paralyzing fear that seeing him caused me made me want to vomit. At least 30 minutes later, I started to hear it drink, even though the living room and kitchen were separated by a wall. Even though I had closed the door, I could still hear what at first started as slurping sounds which were followed up by loud gulps. Then it stopped, and once again 30 minutes later it started drinking. As the slurping started once again, I heard the door to the apartment crack open. It was Emma. As she stepped through the door, I saw her carrying 2 large brown paper bags of groceries in her hands. She was headed to the kitchen. "Hey, let me grab those for you," I said, running over to her, my voice shaking. "Oh, thanks. Are you okay? You look scared?" My eyes shot wide open in a mixture of fear and surprise. I said the first thing that came to mind. "Yeah, just, I didn't expect you to come home so early, and I got a bit spooked." "Shit, sorry. I know I should have called you. Work let me off early today." I started to turn away from her, walking to the kitchen. Trying to keep her away from the kitchen, I told her to wait for me in the living room because I wanted to talk to her about something. I didn't know what I would talk to her about, but that was a problem for future me to resolve. Somehow, it worked. "What's that sound?" she called out to me while walking towards the living room couch. It took me a few seconds to come up with an excuse. "I think it's the sink, or the pipes at least." I opened the door to the kitchen with my eyes closed at first, hesitant to look knowing what would be greeting me. Slowly prying my eyes open, I started to see its outline. My muscles started to lose strength as the details of the man came into my view. I felt the grocery bag start to slip from my arms. My knees buckled. Face first, I fell onto the kitchen floor, scattering the groceries all over the floor. A mixture of a light scream and a yelp escaped from my mouth as my body made contact with the floor. Emma, concerned for my safety, ran into the kitchen. She didn't scream, using all of the strength and mobility I had left in my muscles. I rolled over, expecting to see her face drenched in terror. Her body frozen, still unable to move, just like my body had done the first time that I saw him. But Emma looked concerned. The man was gone. She crouched down beside me. "Oh my God, are you okay? What happened?" I looked around, observing my surroundings. I tripped on the little thing at the bottom of the door frame. I finally managed to blurt out another excuse, not being able to remember what the name of a door sill was. I started to sit up, using a part of the energy that had returned to my body. Pain pulsed through my chest and arms. Emma looked at me with a concerned face. "You've been acting really weird since I got home. Are you sure you're okay?" "Yeah. I think I'm just having one of those days, you know." The confusion on Emma's face said that she didn't know. And to be honest, I didn't either. I guess my luck of pulling random excuses out of my ass ran out. Emma thought that she triggered some sort of PTSD response after barging into the house unannounced at first, apologizing, then trying to change the subject to stop my trembling, which I was still unsuccessfully trying to hide from her. "Did you buy candles?" Emma asked, picking the groceries apart from the garbage that spilled out the can that the man had knocked over, placing them on the table next to the now half-empty glass jars. The flames flickered above the inch or so of molten wax the man was unable to finish drinking. "Yeah. I've been struggling with work lately. They usually help me focus." "Huh. Interesting combination you've got going on here." She looked at me and smiled slightly. I smiled back and chuckled to seem normal. "Yeah. Even I don't know what I was trying to accomplish here, to be honest." I tried to help Emma clean up the spilled groceries, but she did not let me. She told me that I needed to recover like I had been in a car crash instead of having taken a little tumble. After a few seconds of silence, Emma spoke again. "Anyway, what did you want to talk to me about earlier?" A quick jolt of stress shot through my body. In a jumbled mess of lies and fear, I had forgotten what I'd told Emma. I sat there in silence for a few seconds, unable to come up with an excuse. I don't remember. It wasn't anything serious, though." "Wow, did you hit your head too?" she said once again, proudly smiling at her joke. At this point, Emma picked up the last bag of potato chips from the floor and placed it on the table. Then she opened the fridge and started loading the groceries into it. "Anyway, I gotta go get back to work," I blurted out after a few more seconds of awkward silence. "All right, well, good luck." I walked over into the living room and sat down in front of my workstation, which now consisted of a laptop sitting on a small foldable TV tray that had just barely enough room left on it to fit a small USB mouse. The last thing I remember, before I fell asleep, was me mindlessly scrolling through apartment listings, while Emma watched a random 90s horror movie I'm positive only had a budget of $500. I woke up with a light, stinging pain shooting through my dry throat, and a dim hissing sound caused by thousands of water drops striking the ground outside filled the room. I pressed the spacebar on my laptop, the brightness of the screen blinding me temporarily. After taking a few seconds to let my eyes readjust, I managed to make out the time. 3:45 a.m. A strong smell I was unable to make out the origin of assaulted my nostrils. Lavender. The smell hitting my nose had the same effect on me that I would expect smelling salts would have on a weightlifter right before they set a world record. Before I knew it, my legs were moving on their own at an almost uncontrollable pace, fighting back against my mind, which was telling them to slow down after years of being used to navigating both mine and Emma's apartment as steadily as possible to not bother the neighbors. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I stood before Emma's bedroom door. A faint, yellow, pulsating light radiated from a lamp and snuck out of a small gap between the door and the doorframe. Reluctantly, I pushed my left hand up against the door, my right hand grasping onto the doorframe for a sense of stability. Once the door was fully agape, I scanned the inside of the room, my heart skipping a beat for every humanoid shadow cast up onto the wall by the lights from the wicks which were set ablaze and were being slowly burnt away. I walked into Emma's room and made my way over to her bedside table to put out the candle. As I stepped closer towards her, Her face became more defined. I could finally make out her features. She was awake. But no, she could not have been. Even though her eyes were wide open, they never blinked. She didn't even move slightly. As I moved closer, I finally managed to fully make out the expression of pure terror on her face. Her mouth wide agape as if she was about to release a deafening screech. But she could not have. A single drop of solidified wax dribbled out of the corner of her mouth and clung to her cheek. My eyes traced the cream-colored path back towards her mouth. First up her cheek, then between the corner of her mouth, and finally behind her teeth. There. Instead of her tongue or the roof of her mouth, I saw a wall of wax which had filled in the entirety of her mouth. I fell to my knees and hunched forward, supporting my body weight with my arms. I was too late. I resisted the urge to vomit and got back up onto my feet. A mixture of tears and snot slid down my face and onto my lips, shaking. Now I slowly started limping over towards my phone, which I had left on the couch next to where I had awoken just minutes before. Just minutes before my life was destroyed because of my lies. If I had just told Emma what I had gone through. If I had just told her what had happened on the night of the incident, which now seemed trivial. Even if she thought that I was crazy, I know that she would have complied just to make me feel comfortable. It took me at least 30 seconds of repeated attempts to stabilize my hands, enough to properly dial 911. Someone broke into my apartment and hurt my friend, was the only reasonable explanation I could come up with that would not get the operator to hang up on me thinking that this was a prank call. I sat there in the living room for an agonizing 10 minutes, crying. My sadness slowly transformed into anger towards myself, and my mind raced thinking of all the lies I'd told. I kept thinking that if I had just told her the truth, she would not have been laying there in her bed, her body bloated. Every single orifice has signs of forced penetration and has been filled with what seems to be candle wax, is what was written on her autopsy report. For a few days I was the main suspect in Emma's murder. But due to the almost unstoppable crying and the unresponsive state that I was in when the police arrived, mixed with the lack of evidence of me having a way to produce 30 pounds of candle wax, led to me being released out of police custody. But because I was the main suspect, I was not told any details about what had fully happened to Emma. For days, all I had to work off of was the image of her face frozen in terror, and a short glance I caught of her bloated body as she was being carted out on a stretcher. I recounted every single word of our last conversations over and over again, until they became permanently etched into my brain. Emma's parents originally wanted to cremate her, as that is what she had somewhat jokingly asked for whenever the topic of funerals came up. Well, she had joked about wanting to have had Yoon-popped popcorn shoved down her throat before she was sent off to scare the shit out of the guy, cremating me. But due to all the wax which would have been impossible to get out of her body, they were forced to bury her. A few days before Emma's funeral, her body disappeared. After Emma's death, her parents took me into their home. After reading the autopsy reports and seeing her corpse, they had thrown out every single candle they owned, which made their home the safest choice I had. Still, this did not stop me from buying a machete and keeping it under my bed, just in case. I was laying on the bed in their guest bedroom. The day that the police informed Emma's parents about her disappearance. The bedroom is right above the front porch of the house. At first, I heard them ring the doorbell, which was followed up by 3 powerful knocks on the door. For about a minute, I laid there on the bed listening to muffled voices exchanging distorted words I was barely able to make out, which slowly transformed into distorted weeps. Curious, I lifted myself up from the bed, made my way over to the window, and carefully lifted the bottom panel. Making sure to not make too much noise, the distorted muffled sounds started forming into coherent words. We checked the security footage, but the only strange thing we could see was a 5-second time jump. One of the officers spoke in a serious and almost monotone voice, which meant that the security guard, who was the only person in the building, had to climb down 2 flights of stairs, walk through a 40-foot-long hallway, and then drag her body back upstairs and out of the building in 5 seconds. Emma's mom let out a yelp. "But don't worry, ma'am. That's actually good news, because we know that her corpse is still somewhere within the building, and was probably brought to the wrong floor by an intern. We've already warned all of the staff at the hospital to keep an eye out, and we also sent 5 officers to search the hospital." I could not believe what I was hearing. My breathing quickened. But this time, instead of fear, I felt anger. That monster stole her corpse, and was probably in the weird separate plane of existence he always went back to after terrorizing me, cutting off chunks of her body, melting her and drinking her. I closed the window. Emma's mom's cries once again turned into a muffled rumble which was only possible to make out if you knew what to look for. I took a few steps back away from the window, planning to lay back down, not wanting to bother Emma's parents. I bumped into something. Not something. Someone. Its fleshy, towering form as solid as a wall sent me tumbling forward. I knew it was him. He had returned to take me, too. To stretch his swollen, cracked lips, push them down my esophagus, fill my lungs and stomach with wax. But despite all of that this time, I was not scared. I was angry. And I was not going to stand there in terror like I had the last time I saw him. I fell forward onto my knees, my face missing the windowsill just by mere inches. I put my hands onto the floor, lifted one of my knees, and rotated 180 degrees, now facing the monster. To the right of him, pushed up against the wall, was the bed. Light from the sun reflected off of the metallic button which kept my machete in its sheath. The man started to stretch his lips. They were moving towards me, waving a wiggling through the air like a snake slithering towards me. I dove towards the bed, one of my feet pushing off of the floor, and the other pushing against the wall which creaked under the pressure applied to it. I flew for a few moments before slamming down onto the carpet and sliding forward. The heat generated by my skin brushing against the carpet released a sharp, stinging pain throughout my body. My outstretched arm landed just a few inches short of the machete. I quickly bent my arms, pushing my body up, and crawled towards the machete. My fingers wrapped around the handle. I spun around, my back pushed up against the bedside table, once again facing the man. He was still facing the window, but his lips faced me and were just a few feet away from me. For what felt like minutes, but was most likely no longer than a second. I struggled to hook my finger under the strap securing the machete into its sheath. As the lips inched towards me, the man started producing gurgling noises. He was regurgitation wax. I finally pulled the machete out of its sheath. I swung the blade at the man's lips. The blade was not met with any resistance as it sliced through the man's lips, which landed on the carpeted floor with an audible thud. The man did not have a physical reaction to my counterattack. His lips kept creeping towards me. Once again I slashed at the lips. Still no reaction. I repeated this at least 3 more times. I wanted to hurt him. I wanted to take revenge for what he had done to Emma. But fighting back was pointless. I realized that no matter how much I tried to hurt it, I could not hurt him. I could not get rid of him. My rage dissipated, and a mixture of fear and sadness crept in, and soon took over my body. I screamed for help. I screamed in fear, in agony. Tears streamed down my face as the man's lips finally reached my face. He wasn't met with any resistance as his lips snuck between mine, pried my jaw open, and finally started to slide down my esophagus. I heard the cops run up the stairs. They started banging on the door, asking if I was okay, only to have been met with muffled screams. Hot wax started to pour down inside of me. The stinging pain of the heat made me want to plunge the machete, which I had dropped onto the ground next to me, into my stomach to create a gaping wound that the wax would hopefully funnel out of. The texture of the man's slippery, oily lips, matched with the poison-like flavor of the wax, caused me to start gagging. I felt my insides bulging, like at any moment my intestines would have been filled to the point where they would pop. I wanted to vomit, to drain myself of the filth I was filled with. But his lips had plugged my throat, not allowing anything to get out. Hearing my muffled screams, the cops started kicking the door down. The man retracted his lips. The suction aided my attempts at cleansing my insides. I got onto my hands and knees, streams of molten wax pouring out of me, solidifying on the carpet. With another loud thud, the door swung open, slamming into the wall. The man was gone. That's the last thing I remember before I passed out. But according to one of the doctors who was in the ambulance that brought me to the hospital, I was still semi-responsive during the first 10 minutes of the ride to the hospital. Approximately 13.4 pounds of wax were removed from my body. The doctors said that I was in a critical condition, and some of them did not expect me to make it. One of the officers who was there the day the man attacked me took a report of what had happened to me, due to the unmistakable evidence of what had happened to both me and Emma, and the fact that this was the 3rd instance of me reporting something like this. The police finally started investigating who this man might have been. Around a month later, I was discharged from the hospital and once again have been staying in the living room of Emma's parents' house. I've been seeing the man again. Candles were not allowed in the hospital I stayed at, which means that he's probably very hungry. He's close to attacking me again. I know it. He wants to finish what he started, and I don't know if I have the power to fight back. I'm not sure if defeating him is even possible. I'm tired. I've been seeing Emma too. Her bloated, reanimated corpse often appears to be standing next to the man. If I let him take me, will I get to join them? I've tried asking, but they don't answer. They just stare. I can't keep living in constant fear, always looking over my shoulder. I miss Emma.